Good evening, everyone. My name is Patricia LaFour. I'm the Director of Human Rights and Accessibility for the City of Worcester. Tonight is the regular monthly meeting of the Human Rights Commission at 6:02 p.m. We are live, at least some of us live, in the Esther Howland Chamber in City Hall. This meeting is being recorded. If you do not wish to be recorded, you should leave the meeting because you have no option to opt out of that. As a regard to the open meeting law, I will go back to the chair to make some opening statements.
Great. Thank you, Pat. Should we do roll call first, or how do you want to do it? Yeah, okay, great. Let's start with the roll call.
So we'll take a roll call for attendance. As I said, some people are virtual, some people are here. When you say whether you're present or not, if you could identify which that is, I'd appreciate it. Chairperson Guillermo Creamer Jr.
Present in the hall.
Vice Chair Randy Feldman. Present in the hall. Clerk Carrie Witherell.
Present in person.
Member Robert Bellata. Member Bernard Reese.
Present virtual.
Member Anahit Marudian.
Present virtually.
Member Drew Schneblin. Member Jonathan Slavinskis.
Present virtual.
Member Jacqueline Yang.
I know she's trying to sign it.
I'm just letting you. Member Jacqueline Yang.
Here.
Virtually, correct?
Correct.
Thank you. I yield back to the chair.
Great, awesome. Welcome, everyone, and happy Hispanic Heritage Month. That's one of our lovely topics today when we start. Can I just very quickly, just some housekeeping stuff, can we get a motion to approve the minutes from last month?
So moved. So moved.
Carrie, can you second that?
I'll second.
So we have a motion to approve the minutes from last month's monthly meeting. I'll take a roll call vote, please. Chairperson Guillermo Creamer Jr.
Aye.
Vice Chair Randy Feldman.
Aye.
Clerk Carrie Witherell.
Aye.
Member Bernard Reese.
Abstain.
Member Anahit Marudian.
Aye.
Member Drew Schneblin. Member Jonathan Slavinskis.
Aye.
Member Jacqueline Yang.
Aye.
The motion carries.
Great, thank you. Another item of housekeeping, I just want to remind folks, if you are able, I'd love to see you all in person. I know that we have the virtual option, but if folks are able, please let me know. And if we haven't yet, I also really would love to spend some time offline getting to know each and every one of you as well. So whether it's for coffee or meeting up just to chat, would love to meet with commissioners and just kind of get to know you all on a more personal level and kind of hear what makes you all spark and try and integrate that over the next several months in the work that we do. So yeah, just wanted to acknowledge that. And then also there was an email that was sent out by City Hall requesting for cell phone numbers. Please respond to that email. It's not for a public record. It's for an internal thing, just so that we are able to communicate with folks when we need to and such. So please do that when you get the chance. I'm trying to think of what else for housekeeping. Pat, is there anything? No? Okay, great. And then just kind of looking out into the future, October, I unfortunately don't think that I will be in the country during the next Human Rights Commission meeting, which means that our vice chair will be chairing that meeting, and that's something that I'm excited for, and I think he's excited for as well. But I will be in Mexico for my father's wedding, so I will not be here in person for that. And I don't want to log on for that either. I think Randy is very capable of being able to do it. Awesome. So as I started today's meeting, really quickly, our key terms. Let's do that. I didn't want to forget that. Apologies for that. I'm going to kick it over to our clerk and have her read the key terms.
All right, thank you. So Human Rights Commission mission, the HRC was established to promote the city's human rights policy It is the policy of the city to assure that every individual shall have equal access to and benefit from all public services, to protect every individual in the enjoyment and exercise of civil rights, and to encourage and bring about mutual understanding and respect among all individuals of the city. It is the goal of the HRC to ensure that all city residents are treated fairly and equally by eliminating bigotry, discrimination, intolerance, and prejudice. Our work requires us to address institutional racism so that as a community we can achieve racial equity. Our work also requires us to make visible the unheard, unearned, and unquestioned privilege enjoyed by some members of our community to the detriment of others. We take time to make this acknowledgement, to educate, so that a path can be cleared for healing. Key terms: institutional racism. The term institutional racism refers specifically to the ways in which institutional policies create different outcomes for different racial groups. The institutional policies may never mention any racial groups, but their effect is to create advantages for whites and oppression and disadvantage for people from groups classified as people of color. Racial equity. The term racial equity is the active state in which race does not determine one's livelihood or success. It is achieved through proactive work to address root causes of inequalities to improve outcomes for all individuals. That is, through the elimination or shifting of policies, practices, attitudes, and cultural messages that reinforce different outcomes by race or fail to eliminate them. And privilege. The term privilege describes the unearned social power and informal institutions of society to all members of a dominant group. For example, white privilege and male privilege. Privilege is usually invisible to those who have it because we are trained not to see it, but nevertheless it puts them at an advantage against those who do not have it.
Great, and I'll quickly do our land acknowledgement as well. We will continue our practice of acknowledging the traditional ancestral territory of the first peoples of Massachusetts on which land we are convening on tonight. The Nipmuc Nation is what is now Worcester County. While the Nipmuc history predates written history, records from the 1600s inform us that the original inhabitants of Worcester dwelled principally in 3 locations: Packagug, Tatsit, and Wigwam Hill. It is important to make this acknowledgement and to honor the ancestors that have come before us. Unfortunately, it is all too easy to live in this land without ever hearing the traditional names and history of the people who first resided and prospered in these lands and continue to reside and prosper. Wonderful. So, as I had stated when I started the meeting, a happy Hispanic Heritage Month to all of you. I myself come from the Latino background. I have a mother who is Chilean and a father who is Peruvian. Very fortunate to have been born here in the United States, but my Latino roots are very much ingrained in who I am as a person. And Latino roots are all over the city of Worcester, so I definitely want to take some time to acknowledge the fact that Hispanic Heritage Month is from September 15th to October 15th. Why? I like to say it's because Latinos love to be late to things, but the actual answer is the fact that a lot of Independence Days for Latin American countries and South American countries coincide with the middle of September. And so that's where you'll start seeing a lot of that. Now, there are obviously some exceptions, but one of the things I wanted to do to celebrate Hispanic Heritage and Latino Heritage Month is to invite the chair of the Latino Commission, and she is here with us today. And so I'm just going to give her some time to introduce herself, to talk about the work that they're doing. But most importantly, I'd like for us to observe and to also think about ways that we as a commission can help, and just kind of see what other recommendations we could make as our own commission, just to further the work that the Latino community is doing here in Worcester. So without further ado, Laura Martinez. Is it on?
Is it? Can you hear me?
A little bit. Try the other one.
Hello.
Yeah, that's
Great.
on. Perfect.
Gracias, Guillermo. Hi, everybody. My name is Laura Martinez. I was born and raised in the Dominican Republic. I've lived in Worcester for over 20 years, so this is my home. And I am the chair of the Commission on Latino Affairs, which is a fairly new commission in Worcester. We've only been up and running for about 1.5 years so far, so we are definitely getting our gears together and starting to not just have some meetings, but we're also kind of coordinating and having conversations on what the commission's mission and vision will look like. Like I said before, since we are a new commission, it kind of took us a few meetings to really get together, convene, and really work on what are some of the strategic goals that we're looking to achieve throughout the city of Worcester. And as a commission, we've all kind of collectively, with a lot of help, from the city of Worcester, a lot of brainstorming sessions, we really focus on a lot of health equitable outcomes that directly affect the Latino population here in Worcester. And how that's broken down, we've decided to break that down into sections. So we focus a lot on education. So what we mean by that is really having a cohesive way of promoting the way in which Latinos receive information and education throughout the city when it comes to those different chambers and different departments. We've also kind of honed in on housing, and we've also honed in on just communication as a piece altogether. And those are the three main concentrations that we're focusing on in the past year and a half that we have met. We have had a lot of wonderful guest speakers come and share a lot of the work that they've done. For example, we've had the Worcester Public Library be one of our guest speakers, because as we know, that is a hub for information, but specific for the Latino population. That is where we like to flock to receive not just information of what's going on, but also access to resources. We've also had conversations with Worcester Housing Authority to kind of just go over the overview of what their office does and how they directly not just correlate and provide information for the Latino community, but also the things that we need to know and things to look out for. And we've also had conversations in the works with the Department of Health and Human Services. Again, another really great anchor in the Worcester community in general, but also for Latinos as well. But definitely looking to your commission, which has kind of been up and going a little bit longer, for not just guidance, but ways in which we can collaborate and kind of join forces and maybe even share resources to continue the great work. And we're just excited to be here and continue to just advocate for not just Latino rights in Worcester, but also to just say that we're here. We're a very large population here in the city, specifically in the Commonwealth. And with the temperature of what's happening right now, it's a really great resource for us to just share additional information, but then also invite folks in. And also, if you're watching, please come to our meetings. We'd love to hear from you. That is how we learn, and that is how we can continue to do the great work. But with that, I leave it. Thank you so much for having me here. And I look forward to continue the conversation with this commission and others. And to the public, please show up and support all of the commissions, because without you, then we can't continue to do our great work. So.
Gracias, Laura. Do I have any commissioners that have specific questions for her before we kind of discuss without Laura? Awesome. Thank you. Really
Thank you so
appreciate
much.
you being here and stopping by.
Thank you.
So as I said, one of the things that I'd love to kind of quickly touch on as a commission. Oh, I see Commissioner Yang has her hand up.
Hi, when are their meetings?
So they're still working out a scheduling for like a permanent schedule. They don't have like the fourth Monday of every month the way that we do. So they're kind of working a little bit. It's changing every month, but they're going to try and do something more consistent. So as soon as we have the consistency down, we'll let the commission know.
Thank you. Great presentation.
Thank you. So I think one of the things that I would love for us to quickly brainstorm on are like, what are ways in which we could help the Latino community and the commission in general with the work that they're doing. I think one of the things that I would love to do, Pat, and this is something we could put on the docket for next year, is what would a conjoined meeting look like? I think that the Human Rights Commission, in my opinion, is very much an umbrella commission, and I think there's a lot of intersection, particularly with some of the commissions that are coming online, with the LGBTQ Commission, with the Black Commission that's coming online. So I think that having that thought process, it would be wonderful for us to think about for the future. I'm not saying there's an answer right now, but I think it's something to think about. Commissioner Yang, is your hand still up?
No, sorry about that.
That's okay, no worries. I just wanted to make sure. Any commission input or thoughts? Okay. And, doesn't have to be just tied to today's meeting. If anything comes up or you think of anything, please don't hesitate to bring it forward, and we can talk about it offline with Randy, Pat, Kevin, and I, just to discuss things as well. But I want us to definitely think about how we're intersecting with other commissions that are doing great work here in the city. Awesome. All right, we're going to move on. Commission business continued. I wanted to quickly open up for discussion with the Know Your Rights presentation that occurred last month. Any observations from folks? Any comments to share with the group or questions? There was definitely a lot of information download is what I took away from that. And I also took away a lot of, I want to say this appropriately, a lot of heavy feelings, right? Like, I did not come away from that presentation like things were going to be dandy. I felt after that presentation that things were going to be gloomier than I thought. And so I don't know how others felt, or if others are inclined to share how they felt. I know Randy does this work on a daily basis, and we're grateful for that, but I can't imagine how you're dealing with that.
So I'll start with the presentation. So it was an excellent presentation. Part of the beauty of that presentation was not just hearing again from another credible source about the legality of what rights people have and what rights they don't have, what rights ICE has and what rights it doesn't have, what rights the city has in dealing with ICE and what rights it doesn't have in dealing with ICE. Those are all have been laid out in some forms before, but the more often everybody gets to hear it, the better. I also thought the presentation did a very good job about letting people know what resources and actions are possible to play defense against being taken by ICE. And I thought that was a very good job. From that discussion, we thought as a Human Rights Commission that this year we should definitely concentrate on the rights of immigrants, including on undocumented immigrants, and to continue that theme. So next month, we are going to have myself and another immigration lawyer make a presentation on that. Hopefully, we'll have it in English, and parts of it will be in Spanish. And we'll have a different point of view than what we received already, some overlap, some new information, two different attorneys with two different takes on how to go forward. And we hope that everybody could put that on their calendar to tune in that Monday. What's the date again that's going to be?
October 27th, right, Pat? Monday, October 27th?
Monday,
Yeah.
October 27th. And we hopefully have two other additional immigration lawyers in addition to Susan Church, who's an excellent immigration lawyer, to make presentations and go further in depth on this issue. Father, we know that you had something at the church the same night, and Congressman McGovern was there, and maybe you'd like to report a little bit about how that went.
Yeah, I was going to talk about that there. I'm sorry I couldn't. I hear my echo. That's a nice echo.
We don't hear the echo, Father Jonathan.
Okay.
I hear the echo.
Yeah.
Did you hear the echo when we were speaking, or just when you all are speaking?
No, just when we talk.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
We'll turn our mics off.
Okay. Yeah, I'm sorry I missed that one there. We had a great presentation Congressman McGovern put on. And again, like you said, Guillermo, you didn't leave feeling good inside. There was just like a sense of like, ugh. And from our perspective, we had a lot of faith-based leaders there. The fear of, okay, when are they going to start coming into the church doors, and how do we prepare ourselves for that? And so we've sat together and put together sort of like an information packet for other clergy in the area. Want to sort of put that together, and maybe we could do that as part of the Human Rights Commission here, work together on just simple things I never thought of, and my religious sister brought it up, Sister Susie. The big fear is with religious education that takes place downstairs, and now keeping those doors locked during that time. So outsiders cannot come into the building in the lower church during that time there, and having someone sort of stationed at the door to let the families in and out, and not just having the doors wide open, left open for them to come and go if they're late. And then also having designated rooms within the church that our parishioners know about, that have signage on them that clearly states private area, authorized personnel only, and that they would have access to if there was an incident or something there in which they might come in. And so a lot of great information was given. Again, you don't leave an evening like that feeling happy inside at all, but to know that there is information and there are some tools and resources, great resources out there for us, is very helpful there. And so I think as a commission, it's an opportunity for us, especially to work with a faith base, to say, okay, do you know this is what you can be doing for your congregation, and even making sure, like, having signs readily available if they did come in, how to contact me right away, how we could contact a lawyer right away, that way there we can do those things and respond in a speedy manner there. So, but I heard your presentation was great as well. I'm sorry I missed that there, but it looks like we'll be continuing this conversation for a little while sooner, unfortunately there.
Agreed. Yeah. Thank you again, Father Jonathan. I see Commissioner Anna Heat.
Hi, so my feedback to the presentation was I really enjoyed it. I liked how it was, elaborated in a way that people can easily understand, because legal language can be complicated sometimes, which this presentation was really accessible in that sense. This approach really ensured that communities who might not otherwise have access to this kind of information can really learn about their rights, which makes it kind of practical and impactful at the same time. So I really appreciated when she took her time to kind of elaborate the legal terminology, as well as, how that can be implemented in a more practical way.
Great. Any other commission thoughts or comments or questions? I think that the presentation last month was definitely a glimpse of more to be discussed, obviously, next month with Randy and his expertise, and him being joined by folks who he knows are also experts in the field. One of the things that Randy had mentioned, but I'll kind of reiterate, is we're kind of fine-tuning whether or not we have someone that presents in Spanish, it parallel to Randy. And so we're just kind of fine-tuning that, and we'll send out those details once we know how we're going to treat that, whether it's like an interpretation of what Randy's saying or if it's genuinely just in parallel. That's not 100% clear yet. So once we have that information, we'll share that. But obviously, this work is not limited to one community. It's not limited to any community at this point. It's very much open-ended. Everyone is very much under certain feelings with what is going on out there. So, definitely encouraging folks to continue to learn about their rights, to take the time to hear out those presentations. If you know anyone, direct them to our recording for that day, right? Like this is up on the website, so it's something that folks can definitely access. So yeah, just keep all that stuff in mind. But okay, with that, I am going to move us on, unless any other commissioners have any questions for anything or comments. Great. Well, we're excited to have with us Peter Dunn, who is the Chief Development Officer for the City of Worcester, and he's here to give a presentation and talk on all the things that he is doing and how that intersects with the work that we're doing. So without further ado, Peter.
Great. Thank you, Guillermo. Good to be with you all here tonight to share a little bit about what we have going on, specifically in housing, because if I spoke about everything that we're doing, we'd be here for a long time. So I'll just share my screen here for my presentation. And while I am here speaking on behalf of my team, I just wanted to make sure I recognize the talented folks that we have working in our housing development division every day And as you probably know, in maybe previous conversations with the Health and Human Services Department, we work very closely together. So we have kind of our own lanes or our own kind of focus areas of what we do and, the programs that we administer and, our expertise. But obviously the housing issue is very, has a lot of depth to it. And certainly we collaborate with the Health and Human Services Department on a variety of these topics. So I'll just kind of jump right into it here for you. One of the things that we did, let me see. Is that not progressing? Oh, I think there might be a little bit of a delay on the screen. Let me see. There we go. So one of the things that we had communicated to City Council in 2023, shortly after City Manager Batista was inaugurated officially in his permanent contract, was we had heard from community and other stakeholders that a lot of what we do can be kind of complicated because it spans a variety of different programs and activities and working with different partners out in the community, and how could we better communicate that as a cohesive housing strategy. And so we had submitted this housing strategy with this kind of graphical depiction to help people understand it better, starting with the three green areas on top were three of the values that were part of the City of Worcester's previous strategic plan, which has been updated just recently. And so those values being opportunities for all, strong neighborhoods, and equity. So making sure that those values were guiding the work that we were doing and this strategy overall. And then really our primary day-to-day efforts can be organized into three key pillars. So one of which being housing production, preservation, and healthy homes. We'll dive into each one of these a little bit further, but housing preservation, production, and healthy homes. So that's really thinking about the building stock, the housing stock in the city. How do we make sure that we're creating new housing opportunities, understanding where the needs are, so that we're being strategic about any resources we have available to facilitate new housing production, making sure that those are meeting the greatest needs in the community. Also not ignoring the existing building stock. We have a very old housing stock in the city, majority of which was built prior to 1978. So we need to make sure that we're keeping that existing building stock in good order, making sure that we have good quality of life and healthy living environments. And we have a couple of programs dedicated to healthy homes. As we know, where folks live in their home is one of the key social determinants of overall health and outcomes. And so making sure that we're not just focusing on creating new housing opportunities, but making sure that we're addressing the existing old building stock in the city as well. Second pillar being various assistance that we provide to individuals. So whether those are homeowners, tenants, as well as the unhoused population. This is probably the area that we collaborate most frequently with the Health and Human Services Department, as well as community partners, and we'll talk a little bit further about that. And then the third pillar being public policy. So obviously with the city administration, working closely with our legislative body, the city council, what can we be doing on a public policy level to make sure that we're addressing the housing needs of the community? And all three of those pillars really built on some very important foundations, one of which being the local, state, and federal resources that are so necessary to carry out the work that we do every day, and making sure that we're, taking advantage of the resources that exist, trying to preserve programs, as there have been obviously budget constraints and other issues happening in Washington relative to federal funding and existing programs, but also trying to get creative and expand the way that we can bring new resources into the mix as well. Also built on an important foundation of community-based partnerships. What we do cannot be done alone as a municipality. As we've said, the housing challenges and needs that are facing our community are very wide-ranging, and they're very deep. And so we cannot address all of that as a municipality. Obviously, the municipality also does not build or own housing. So Worcester Housing Authority being an important partnership, but also several nonprofit and non-governmental organizations, and a number of which you've heard from throughout the work that you all do with the various speakers and collaborations that you've done as a commission. And then also the third foundation being a housing production plan. And that is something that has been an important update for us over the last year. About a year and a half ago, we secured a state grant through the Housing Choice Communities program that allowed us to bring on a consultant and do a real deep dive of our demographics over the last several years, as well as demographic projections, so that we could take a deep dive into understanding when we talk about housing production and new housing opportunities, what are the greatest needs? What are the types of housing, whether it's, housing for seniors, housing for families, affordable housing, market rate, home ownership versus rental opportunities, again, the existing housing stock, and certainly there's commentary in that about public policy as well. Hopefully you've all heard about it and seen it. There has been a number of opportunities to get engaged in that process, and it was recently adopted by the City Council. So we've sent that to the state for their final designation of that. I will note that we conducted this housing production plan under state requirements. So you might be familiar with Chapter 40B, which is a state law that basically prescribes that communities have at least 10% of their housing stock be deed restricted affordable housing. They monitor that under what's called the subsidized housing inventory. And if your community drops below 10%, you are required to do this housing production plan. Our subsidized housing inventory has consistently been above 10%, about 13% right now. So we weren't required to do this, but we felt like it was going to be an important document and exercise to help us carry out this overall housing strategy. So we decided to do it even though it wasn't required by the state. So we did it under the auspices of the state requirements and have also sent it to them for their final review. And then as you think about this housing strategy, it was done, this framework was created in 2023. So we're continuing to make adjustments or adapt, especially as we get into the work of these 3 pillars, mainly due to the outcomes of the housing production plan. And then the other notation I have is just relative to the update of the City of Worcester's FY25 to FY29 strategic plan. So we continue to kind of work through those various planning efforts to make sure that they're all cohesive. Just diving into the first pillar a little bit here on housing production. So a couple of key metrics for you. In 2024, just within that calendar year, there were over 900 units of new housing brought online in the city. Right now, actively under construction, there's over 1,500 units actively under construction. By my calculation, about 23% of that is affordable by some level. Hopefully, you're all familiar generally with affordable housing, with what I call the capital A, deed-restricted affordable housing. They can be at various levels of area median income, so not all affordable housing or not all deed-restricted affordable housing is the same. We'll talk a little bit about some of that, but there are, based on some of the funding sources that you might be using or certainly addressing the community needs that you have, there could be units that are targeting various levels of area median income. But in order to be classified as official affordable housing on that subsidized housing inventory that I mentioned, it has to be at least no greater than 80% of area median income. But we certainly have a number of projects, a number of programs that support affordable housing at lower levels of area median income, not just that 80% level. And then what I would call sort of the lowercase a affordable housing is naturally occurring affordable housing. You've probably heard that term used. It's becoming more popular across the Commonwealth and beyond. And that's effectively like the natural rate of affordable housing that isn't necessarily deed restricted. So we've been talking a lot about that in Worcester as an administration and with the City Council, because that is arguably the more vulnerable affordable housing stock that we have, because you do not have that deed restriction to protect those rents. So when you think about the stories of the folks that might be living in a 3-decker and it gets purchased and then the rents are going up rapidly, where historically those have been, rents that have been at or below what you would consider affordable rents. That's kind of the naturally occurring or lowercase a affordable housing, because it's not protected by any deed restriction. So we've been trying to come up with strategies to sort of preserve that. And I would also encourage you as I go through this to interrupt me and ask questions. I see a hand raised from one of our commissioners here. Jacqueline, did you have a question for me?
I think Commissioner Yang's hand motion is stuck.
Oh, okay. But I forgot to mention that early on. Definitely, if you, based on what we're talking about, the slide that I'm on or topic, definitely feel free to interrupt me as we go along. And then right now, we have over 3,000 additional units of housing that are either permitted or proposed in the city. There's a number of reasons why those are not actively under construction. It is a very difficult time. While we, I think, have some great successes to be proud of with the number of units brought online recently and those that are under construction now, there are a lot of headwinds right now as it relates to project feasibility that have prevented another 3,000 units from actually getting in the ground and under construction right now. Just to highlight one area that I think was of particular, actually, that'll be the next slide. But one of the tools that we created, very important, as I mentioned, one of the foundations being leveraging local, state, and federal resources. One tool that was created a couple of years ago, a new tool for us, is our Affordable Housing Trust Fund in the city. We hadn't had one previously, primarily due to a constraint on a dedicated funding source. Because if you create an affordable housing trust fund as a community, you want to make sure that you actually have dollars to support it and capitalize it. We started it when we committed a significant amount of American Rescue Plan Act dollars, pandemic relief dollars, for its initial capitalization. And that was over $17 million committed out of the American Rescue Plan Act. They have had some other funding that they've been able to leverage, and particularly some interest that has accrued on some of those American Rescue Plan Act dollars. So right now, where it stands is our Affordable Housing Trust Fund has committed $18.4 million to affordable housing projects in the city. It's 552 total units, a lot of which are either, some have been completed, some are underway. There are a couple that are still set to get under construction soon, and we're cautiously optimistic that they will get under construction soon. But 552 total units that have been leveraged through that effort, 497 of which are affordable. Obviously, some of these projects have mixed income, so some do have some market rate mixed into it, but 497 of those are affordable. In addition, one of the priorities of the Affordable Housing Trust Fund that have come out of a number of community engagement efforts, including this commission and the Accessibility Commission of the city, was prioritizing ADA accessible units. So one of the things that they did in their request for proposals as a requirement for any project that receives dollars from them is they have to double the building code requirement. So in a lot of these projects, when you have like new construction of a certain amount, you have to do 5% of the units accessible, and their requirement is 10%, at least 10% of the units being ADA accessible. So that has helped us generate 72 ADA units. And then of all of those commitments and projects that they're working on, that has leveraged over $360 million of other funding.
Can I ask
so
a
good
quick
success.
question?
Yes.
I'm sorry. So the money that's allocated right now is overseen by which group again?
So this is the Affordable Housing Trust Fund has its own board of trustees that was created when that fund was established.
And can you just touch on who sits on that board of trustees and how that was developed?
Ooh, yes, that's a good question that I don't have right in front of me. I believe there's 9 trustees, if I remember correctly. Most of them are at large. Some of them have to have expertise in housing development, housing finance. And then we have 2 seats that must be filled by lived experience, so current tenants of affordable housing. And I will definitely call to your attention that both of those seats right now are vacant. So if you know of anybody that lives in affordable housing, please encourage them to get involved with that. It's a great board to sit on. And we did have 1 filled. I think we even had 2 filled for a short time. But we have those 2 seats are currently vacant, and we would love any assistance in terms of getting the word out on that.
Can we put forward a motion for a request to the city manager, understanding what his plan is to get those seats filled? Can I get a second for that, please?
I'll second that.
And I could respond briefly in terms of the administration's efforts. So we have reached out to the Worcester Housing Authority, Worcester Common Ground, Maine South CDC, so your community-based organizations that own and operate affordable housing, to make sure that they're getting the words out to their residents about that opportunity.
I appreciate that. I think the reality is that 2 vacant seats, particularly from that population, if it's not working, then we have to figure out a solution. So Pat, can we get a roll call for that?
We have a motion before us, made by the chair, seconded by the clerk. A roll call vote, please. Clerk Carrie Withrow.
Aye.
Vice Chair Randy Feldman.
Aye.
Chair Guillermo Creamer Jr.
Aye.
Member Robert Bellata. Member Bernard Reese.
Aye.
Member Anna Heat Meridian.
Aye.
Member Drew Schneblin. Member Jonathan Slavinskis. Member Jacqueline Yang.
Sorry, Pat, could you not hear me?
That is correct.
Okay.
Could you hear me?
You didn't say anything, so I'm here.
Thank you.
And that's an aye for me.
Thank you.
Sorry about that.
Member Jacqueline Yang.
Hi.
The motion carries. Thank you all.
Great, thank you. You can continue, Peter. Thank you.
Sure. And I also see, I think, member.
Oh yeah, Member Schneblin, do you have a question?
Yeah, it's a tough one. You don't have to learn it. Just a real quick, you might go into this later, but I'm just curious, what is the area median income for Worcester?
That is a good question. I do have it on my phone here.
It's mid-40s, right?
It's higher than that now. I think one of the mid 40s is actually the 80% AMI. So right now, and it can get pretty complicated when we talk about this because it also has to depend on the number of persons in the household. But I can give you a sense for the 80% area median income. One person household is $69,850. For a two-person household, again, this is that 80% area median income. It's $79,800. And what we've tried to prioritize. And it's come up a lot, you may have heard through different city council settings and whatnot, is the 60% area median income. And so for one person, that's $54,000, and for two-person household, that's $61,740. These come from the federal government, so they update these every year. So these are the most recent, which is FY25 from HUD. And then to give you a sense, HUD also puts out fair market rents based on the similar data that they aggregate and obviously in line with income that they're analyzing. So for a studio in Worcester, the fair market rent is $1,429. A one bedroom is $1,438. A two bedroom is $1,854. And a three bedroom is $2,265. That's for FY25.
I'm sorry, a follow-up question to that though. So then when we talk about market rate housing, those numbers don't align.
Market rate housing effectively just means that it's unrestricted. So you could see market rate units at a variety of price points, including honestly, those naturally occurring affordable housing units. Like if there's a 3-decker and it doesn't have a deed restricted, technically that's market rate. But I think when people hear market rate, they think more about a lot of the newer construction, like luxury kind of higher price point that's been coming online in the city. So not all market rate is created equal or is set by a certain dollar amount. A lot of it is driven by what are the amenities. So in cases of some of the newer market rate that's being built, when there's a pool and there's a gym and there's a co-working space and there's a free parking space and there's a gym and all of that, part of that higher rent is because of the amenities that are offered versus what you might be finding in an older building that has none of those amenities.
I do see Father Slavinskis with his hand up.
Yes.
Yeah. I've been going through some of these numbers actually. The diocese has been putting numbers together as well as we look at the northern Lincoln Street area and Burncoat Street, Indian Lake area there. And I found it interesting there. In terms of median households in Lincoln Street, Belmont Street, we have the numbers. 42,000, just about 43,000. And then, of course, you go to 01606, Greendale, Indian Lake, jump to 72,000 there. And, you look at the number of people on SNAP benefits in our area, and I would say my area there where I'm living versus up there. And so, obviously, there's a great concern for the housing. So I was just throwing those numbers out because similar to those numbers that you gave. But when you look at them in terms of just the geographical areas, it's been sobering as well.
And the other thing through the chair that you made me just think of that is a very important concept to understand is that when HUD puts out, the federal government Department of Housing and Urban Development puts out these area median income numbers that I was just reading, it is the area, it is the Worcester metro area. So it is not necessarily reflective of the median income for the city of Worcester proper.
Right, so that doesn't help
correct.
because the surrounding towns have a much higher income.
Correct.
That's great.
Correct. Okay, so moving on, this was an area I think was of particular interest as well. So permanent supportive housing, and this has been talked about a lot, and especially with our commissioner, Dr. Maddie Castile, leaving. This is one of the things that she was working very hard on because we had a Housing First committee as well as Sustaining Housing First coordinating council that was really trying to focus on permanent supportive housing. So this is generally referred to as housing that is at the 30% area median income, so deeply affordable, and it comes with supportive services. So there was a study that they had done several years ago, I think it was even probably 2019, it was around the pandemic timeframe, that said that based on the data that they had collected that we needed 106 permanent supportive housing units, and since that time we've had some successes. It's about 64 units, so we have some work to do on that, but these are some of the highlighted projects that we partnered with to get these permanent supportive units into the community. So the YWCA had renovated their property, as you all probably know, and that resulted in 4 net new units at the YWCA. And then Abby's House similarly did some improvements and renovations at their property, and that resulted in 3 net new units there. The Place to Live project, which is sponsored by the Worcester Housing Authority and Building Futures, Inc. at 38 Lewis Street, that was 24 units. 6 Wyman Street, which is a SMOC property, the South Middlesex Opportunity Council, 15 units. They just recently, you probably read about, they cut the ribbon and just opened 30 Winfield Street, which was 18 units of permanent supportive housing. And SMOC also is about to embark on 20 additional units at 237 Chandler Street, which some of you might know as the MLK Opportunity Center. And then a lot of folks are aware of the proposed conversion of the Oriole Drive Hotel by Worcester Community Housing Resources. That project is proposed to have 90 total units, but based on where they're at in the funding sources and trying to get it over the goal line to get started, because it hasn't quite been able to get wrapped up, they're trying to finish how many of those 90 units will be permanent supportive. So likely, half or so, with the other half being affordable, but they're working through that analysis now to figure out just how many of those units will be permanent supportive housing.
You may touch on this, but I'm curious if you could speak a little bit to, like, if I'm not mistaken, as an observer from the outside, part of the barrier for 90 Oriole Street was the neighborhood. Is that not correct?
I would not characterize that project has not yet gotten underway because of the neighborhood. That's not an accurate characterization.
Okay, but were there very tense conversations that
Yes.
were had because of where it's located and the activity that the neighborhood had?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. One of the things that is a real challenge for just successfully getting permanent supportive housing units done is that you not only need to identify subsidy to offset the cost of the construction, but you also rely on vouchers, right? So when we're talking about deeply affordable housing at 30% area median income, in order for that property to be stabilized and be able to pay its bills, it also requires a voucher that is providing rental subsidy as you're going through year over year the operations of the property. So it kind of creates a twofold in terms of the subsidy requirement, both on the front end to subsidize the construction costs, and then on an ongoing basis with the vouchers. And there are effectively no available project-based vouchers from the Commonwealth right now. You've probably read a little bit about that. Even just sustaining the number of project-based vouchers that they have now has been a real challenge, because as rents continue to go up, the cost of maintaining those existing project-based vouchers goes up. And so it's hard for them to, within their budget constraints, be able to provide additional project-based vouchers. So moving on to some public policy highlights. Some of these hopefully you've heard about because we've been working on these for a few years now, but inclusionary zoning was adopted in 2023 by the City Council. That is, if you're not familiar, a requirement that any new housing production, in our case of 12 units or more, has a set aside of a certain amount for deed-restricted affordable housing. And so ours is, I would say, across the Commonwealth, I would say ours is, in an average range of what that requirement is. We have a sliding scale inclusionary zoning ordinance where it depends on the area median income of the affordable units that you're creating. So if you're doing 60% area median income, you have to do 10% of the units as affordable at that level. If you're doing 80% area median income, you have to do 15% of the units at that affordable level. And then we also have a payment in lieu option, which would be a fee calculation based on the cost of the project. So it's 3% of the hard construction costs of the project, and anybody that elects that payment in lieu option for compliance, those payments go to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, so that as ARPA expires, we can have another funding source to see that continued recapitalization of the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. We do have a few projects that have selected that option for compliance. They're underway, or some of them are proposed, some of them are underway. And so the payment comes before they get their certificate of occupancy. So we haven't seen payments go into the trust fund, but we do have a couple of projects under construction that will be making payments in the near future. That's important, having that option, because there are also, certain developers as well as sources of funding that it's a different asset class, right? When you're talking about housing development, affordable housing, market rate housing, or unrestricted housing, it is a different asset class when you talk about affordable housing. So we felt that in addition to having an option to get dollars to recapitalize the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, that it was also important because we weren't basically excluding an entire market or opportunity for new housing to be created in the city, because there are certain sources of funding, as I mentioned, or companies that just don't do affordable housing. So that's the kind of policy that we have right now for inclusionary zoning. We continue to evaluate it. I think it's related to a couple of these others. I'll actually skip to the Community Preservation Act.
Peter, before you move
yeah.
on, can I ask about inclusionary zoning? So of the developments that have been proposed or started since inclusionary zoning ordinance passed, what percentage has chosen 80%, what percentage has chosen 60%, and what percentage has chosen to put the money in the alternative banking kind of system of supporting community development in general instead?
Sure. So I don't have the precise numbers on that. There's a couple of reasons, and it's kind of hard to track, right? I feel like when I refer to inclusionary zoning projects, I think it's helpful to reference projects that otherwise would not have any kind of affordability requirement, or otherwise wouldn't be making any kind of contribution to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. So for example, we have a number of low-income housing tax credit projects underway right now that are already going to be 100% affordable or 50% affordable, or the projects that we're partnering right now with the Worcester Housing Authority on Curtis Apartments and Lakeside Apartments. So while those have happened and gotten underway since inclusion, I don't really refer to those as an inclusionary zoning project because they were going to do that anyways. So in terms of those privately financed, otherwise would have been market rate, but they're subject to the ordinance, so they need to comply in some manner, it's honestly less than 10 projects. And that is for a couple of reasons as well. The development cycle is very long. When you think about how long it takes to identify an opportunity, identify a site, get site control, secure permitting, secure financing, get under construction, that can be multiple years. And so we adopted this in 2023. The other thing that is extending that development cycle, or the applicability, if you will, is in last year in November of 2024, Governor Healy signed the Mass Leads Act, which is the economic development bill of the state. And within the Mass Leads Act, there was permit extension language, which basically said that if you had an active site plan approval or some other entitlement for your housing project, or a building permit that was issued by a certain date, those approvals were extended for 2 years. So where we were starting to see some projects that were coming back to the planning board for an extension of a year on their planning board approval, or the building permit otherwise would have expired after 6 months, we've seen a number of those active approvals for projects that were exempt from inclusionary zoning basically preserve their exemption because their approvals have been automatically extended by law for 2 years. So that is something that has also kind of extended the cycle and basically the lifespan of the applicability of inclusionary zoning on some of these projects that were already in the pipeline and approved.
So that extension that the Healy administration and the legislature passed, the way you described it, did those affect things that were already approved in one form or another before the inclusionary
Yes.
zone? Okay.
Yes.
So that's why you're saying that we only have 10.
Yes.
Because so many other things
Yes.
were. Okay, so of those 10, and I understood how long these things take to develop, but of those 10, can you tell us what percentage have chosen 80%, 60%, and the trust?
Yeah, so it's been a healthy mix. I don't know, again, I don't have the precise numbers, but we do have some that are electing payment in lieu. We have some that are selecting the inclusion of the units. And I would say we, I think, have been effective so far for a couple of reasons. One is that when we set out to create this sliding scale approach and options for compliance, it was really a hypothesis, right? About like, how will the market respond to this regulation? And it wouldn't do us any good if we had everybody choosing the same option, right? Because then the other options are effectively useless because you've created a framework where everybody is choosing the same option. So I think our hypothesis was pretty correct in the sense that we are seeing a healthy mix. Some folks doing payment in lieu, some folks doing 60%, some folks have done 80 or a mix of 60 and 80, which I think is good. And then the other thing that we tried to build in as an incentive was, again, where if you choose the 60% area median income, which is arguably more in need for our community than 80% area median income, you do fewer units. You do 10% of the project versus 15% of the project. And there's some other nuances to it. I don't know if we want to get into the nuances, but there's some other nuances to it relative to the rent levels that we are seeing more projects choose the 60% option than the 80% option. So I think, again, like our hypothesis is starting to be proven correct in that we wanted to have the 80% out there as an option, but also kind of have it be a little bit of a skew towards encouraging folks to really choose that 60% option. And I think so far what we're seeing is that that is the case. Yeah.
Quick question, and forgive me if this just is kind of silly because I don't know how this works, but when developers come into Worcester, is it your office that they approach? And like, do you have like a presentation that you give them? Like, how do you sell them Worcester? Like, I'm just curious if that is primarily through you or if that's through partners like the chamber or partners like different organizations. Like, I'm very curious about that.
Sure. Yeah. Candidly, we don't do a lot of like selling Worcester or marketing. Like, we're not going out to like national conferences trying to say, please come to Worcester. A lot of what we're doing, and some of it has to do with just the staff capacity that we have, a lot of what we're doing is dealing kind of with what's in front of us. It's very transactional. So certainly because our office oversees all of the land use boards and commissions like Planning Board and Conservation Commission, Historical Commission, Zoning Board of Appeals, a lot of it tends to be development review and transactional in that regard. What we do offer, which has been, I think, celebrated as a good thing, helpful for us and helpful for the development community, is we do what's called an IRT meeting, an interdepartmental review team, where it's pre-development consultation. So before they file for a site plan approval or before they make any of those official kind of actions, we offer pre-development consultation where, based on what they're describing, we can give them some feedback on design or feedback on what you're talking about here requires a variance or it requires a special permit, or maybe it's just a building permit in some examples. And then we can help them understand what the community needs are at that level as well. So that's kind of how, I guess, what the front door is for us. But definitely some of the other partners in the city, like the Worcester Regional Chamber of Commerce, Discover Central Mass, are doing a little bit more of that marketing engagement than our office is doing.
I guess the reason why I'm asking is because, like, if I understood what you were sharing with us, it's that since inclusionary zoning has passed, not too much has happened. And so I'm curious if we should be a little bit more intentional in getting in front of people to say, yes, inclusionary zoning did pass here. Maybe let's get more creative in finding partners that aren't as familiar with Worcester. That was the reason why I asked.
Yep. Yeah, well, we do do some level of outreach, I guess I would say. In some cases, we might have like a property that we're putting out for disposition. And I don't know that we want to get into all these topics right now, but the Denholm example, we are facilitating the redevelopment of the Denholm property. So when we put that out to bid, we definitely did our own outreach and targeted, knowing which developers are out there that specialize in affordable housing or specialize in certain things. We also did a bid on the historic portion of the senior center. So 128 Providence Street, the former nurses' quarters when St. Vincent Hospital was there. We have a senior, we put it out and wanted to see senior housing. That makes a lot of sense, having senior housing connected to the senior center. We do have a senior housing developer that is under agreement, that's doing due diligence right now. It's Rogerson Communities, and they've done a number of senior affordable housing. So we do some of our intentional outreach when it's appropriate. And I would say that is necessary sometimes, right? Because one of the things that has been long, I guess, that we've been anxious for, a couple of things. We would love to see artist live workspace in the city. We would love to see LGBTQ housing in the city. And you can't just, like, when somebody's coming in and they're proposing a project, if they've never done that type of housing before, even if we say it and say this is a community need, it's not necessarily going to happen, or not likely to happen if they've never done something like that. So we do need to have some targeted outreach of, like, we've spoken with the group that did Pride in the Boston area. We've spoken with groups that have done artist live workspace, like the Appleton Lofts. So sometimes that's a better way of trying to facilitate addressing a community need, is trying to get somebody in that has direct experience doing a project that you've identified as an important need. So. Just related to the public policy highlights again, and it was I know I kind of got kicked out, but I think I'm back in. MBTA communities law. So this is something that a lot of towns have been grappling with, as I'm sure you all know, that went into effect and requires communities either with commuter rail or adjacent to commuter rail to have a certain amount of acreage in their community that allows for multifamily development by right without special permit. We did not need to make any modifications to our zoning ordinance to comply with this. We've always been a pretty permissive area for multifamily housing development by right in our zoning ordinance, so we did not have to make any changes to that. That compliance has been confirmed. One thing we did need to do, and this is something that is important to just kind of understand, is that inclusionary zoning, while we support it, and it is one tool that you can have in trying to address the affordable needs of your community, it is technically a restrictive zoning ordinance. And so under MBTA communities law, if your inclusionary zoning ordinance exceeds a requirement of 10% of the units at 80% AMI, which ours does exceed, they required you to do an economic feasibility analysis to be done by a third party to make sure that you weren't creating policies or restrictions that had the unintended consequence of actually inhibiting housing production. Because at the end of the day, a lot of the root of the issues in the Commonwealth around pricing, rents going up and home prices going up has been an underproduction of supply. And so inclusionary zoning is a restrictive measure that the Commonwealth wants to make sure we're not, that we are encouraging housing production in the Commonwealth. So our third party was CMRPC for that, the Central Mass Regional Planning Commission. The outcome of that, they went through a variety of scenarios of like a 20-unit project, a 50-unit project, a 100-unit project at different levels of or options for compliance under our inclusionary zoning. And without getting into all of the details of that, basically it showed that there are a lot of challenges right now with project feasibility in the city of Worcester, but inclusionary zoning is not the one cause positively or negatively for feasibility. So when you think about interest rates, when you think about construction costs, when you think about land acquisition, all of those things, there is, in a lot of scenarios, a need for subsidy, a need for public-private partnership to make these projects pencil out and get financed. And so they said, essentially, like, keep an eye on it. Inclusionary zoning is one lever of many levers that could influence project feasibility. So keep an eye on it, evaluate whether it's working or not. We have been keeping an eye on it. I think we need probably another 6 months, or certainly maybe even another year, to really see if inclusionary zoning is working the way that we intended it to give an update, to the city council and the community of, like, should we keep it the way it is? Should we consider any modifications? Right now, I think we're still in a let's keep it the way it is and see how it continues to play out, because at least we're seeing in some examples the market or certain projects responding in a way that we had kind of hoped they would respond. So I think right now it's that's where we're at, and that was approved, if you will, by the state. So we are compliant with MBTA communities law. We also did enabling zoning for accessory dwelling units before the Commonwealth required it. We did it in like January of 2024, and then it was required by the Commonwealth in August of 2024. It took a while for the Commonwealth to put out guidance about compliance with their state law, and once that guidance was issued in early 2025, we did submit an amendment to the planning board. It's currently with the city council. There were a couple things that we needed to tweak to be compliant with the state law. Largely, ours was very effective and very much compliant. The one notable thing that needs to change for Worcester is our zoning ordinance initially had an owner occupancy requirement, and the state law does not allow you to have an owner occupancy requirement on the property. So that's one of the notable changes. that we had to make it compliant with the state law. So far, I believe we have over 30 permits applied for, and many of which have been issued for accessory dwelling units. In many cases, it's a building permit. The way that we created it, we wanted to make sure that it was easy to do, by right, pretty seamless. So if you comply with some basic dimensional requirements, then you can just pull a building permit. If you do not comply with some of those dimensional requirements, it doesn't mean you can't do it. It might just require a special permit from the planning board. So we do have some that have received special permit from the planning board and a number that have been by right. And I think overall it's over 30 that have been proposed. A few have been completed, and the number of the others are at some, point in the process in terms of creating their ADU on their property. And if you don't know about ADUs, encourage you to look at it. I think it is an important policy measure, and they're not all the same, right? So you can have internal accessory dwelling units, could be a renovated attic, a renovated basement. You could have detached ADUs, so it could be an existing detached structure like a garage, or it could be a new detached structure. I know there's been a number of companies with like prefab structures that say we can deliver the ADU to your property. So not every accessory dwelling unit is created the same. And we have a variety of examples of those that have submitted permits. So I do think it's an important thing as we think about, especially what the housing production plan said, and Worcester Now Next. This was a specific recommendation out of the Worcester Now Next long-range plan, is we need more options for folks. So it's not that we just need to build more affordable housing or build more single-family homes. We need to create options for folks. And certainly many of the anecdotal kind of examples for accessory dwelling units is you might have a family that folks want to age in place. So maybe they're empty nesters. Maybe they had a larger family that was occupying a 3-bedroom or a 4-bedroom. They no longer need 3-4 bedrooms, but they love their neighborhood. They want to age in place. So could they actually move into the accessory dwelling unit, downsize into something more affordable, and then actually unlock that larger home for a growing family, but allow them to age in that neighborhood? Or if there's, as we've seen with folks that are, graduating from college and rent is very expensive, or trying to purchase their own home is very expensive, but maybe they want that level of independence, so rather than just moving back in home with their parents, they could have an accessory dwelling unit that gives them a little more independence, or certainly anybody that might have special needs, whether it's caring for loved one caregivers living in an accessory dwelling unit and such. So there are a variety of, household examples or living situations that make this a very smart policy. I had mentioned Community Preservation Act. So this was not something that we initiated. This was done by the voters of Worcester. So as you all know, in 2022, the voters of Worcester adopted Community Preservation Act. Our office is involved in carrying out the program of that. We won't get into all those details tonight. We could be here for another hour. But one of the things I wanted to highlight is that this is one of the things that is helping us to recapitalize the Affordable Housing Trust Fund as well. So as ARPA is getting exhausted and basically expiring, we have payment in lieu that could come in from inclusionary zoning to the trust fund. And then we also have Community Preservation Act dollars that'll be going into the trust fund. The first round, most recent round, the Community Preservation Committee allocated $1.25 million to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. They have a round that was just open. Applications were due last week, actually, so they'll be evaluating those applications for the $1.25 million that they have available. But to put it into perspective, as I mentioned earlier, we had over $17 million of American Rescue Plan Act dollars, so we do need to come up with ways of how do we keep that Affordable Housing Trust Fund recapitalized in a very healthy way, because I can tell you that we received, requests that far exceed the $1.25 million. So anything that we can continue to do to make sure that we're kind of maximizing the potential impact of the trust fund is important. Sure, Annie.
Affordable Housing Preservation Program and Affordable Housing Trust Fund are two separate things or the same thing?
They are two separate things.
Okay.
Yeah.
So while we're still talking about the money that came from the Community Preservation Act, we've given away one round of funding so far, and we're entering the process for applying for the second round.
Yes.
And I remember that there was 3 trenches of funding that we could have. Do you have any recollection of what the percentage was of housing and preservation and parks?
Yes, it was a good mix. So Randy's referring to, under Community Preservation Act, the funds can be used for 3 purposes. One is affordable or community housing. Second one would be open space and recreation, and the third one being historic preservation. It's a requirement under state law that each one of those three categories gets at least 10% of the allocation. It does not require you to do that every single year. In terms of if you just didn't have any projects proposed, you would have to set aside a reserve to make sure that those dollars are complying with that breakdown. But it also doesn't require you to do like a third either. So we had a good healthy mix. I think the most was actually historic preservation in the first round. And when I just do the math quickly, the amount that went to housing was about 30%. That 1.25 was about 30% of the.
And preservation was a little bit above that then?
Yes, yes.
Okay. And then the other program that when I was reading all the material you gave us, thank you, it was excellent. The Affordable Housing Preservation Program, I had never heard of that one. What's that one all about?
Yes, if I could touch on that one in just a minute.
when you
Yeah.
get to it, sure.
And then the thing that we won't, because I want to be mindful of my time here, is, in your time here, is rental registry is another public policy. It is being carried out by inspectional services, so I also probably wouldn't be able to answer some specific questions very insightfully, but that is a public policy measure that is helping us, particularly with the existing building stock, making sure that we're getting into the existing units and doing a good job of inspecting those, and also getting good contact information for owners, local contact, so that issues can be addressed in a quick way.
How about rental assistance? By looking at what you gave us, again, I want to say how excellent it was. It became clear to me that there was so much AARP money that came to us, and so much that we're not going to get in the future, that this was a unique one-time chance to fund a lot of different things that will be very challenging to keep to any degree of funding in the future. So I was wondering if the rental assistance was just ARPA money, or is that something the city does all the time? What is that exactly?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a good segue, because my next slide is about other programs, and this really speaks to that third pillar of various assistance for homeowners, tenants, as well as the unhoused population. So I'll speak to that in just a second, but quickly, we do have a very successful lead paint abatement program and healthy homes program. This is something that we do have to apply to get these dollars. We have a very old building stock, as I mentioned, and a number, probably I think thousands of units that do not have certificates that the lead paint has been abated out of the unit. So it's something that we continue to really chip away at. But one thing that I wanted to highlight is just in 2024, we successfully secured a $4.1 million grant from the Department of Housing and Urban Development to keep that going. We expect that $4.1 million will help us address 165 additional units to make sure that the lead paint is abated. And usually these are targeting units that have children under 6 living in them, because they're most vulnerable to those hazards in the home. And then the other piece related to that is because of the success we've had with our lead paint abatement program over the years, the federal government has actually asked us to provide technical assistance to other grantees throughout New England. So I think we have probably one of the more respected lead paint abatement programs really nationwide. So wanted to give kudos to our staff on that. I'll just touch on down payment assistance really quickly. We do have a down payment assistance program that we've had for some time, but we were able to do a lot more with the American Rescue Plan Act, to your point as well.
Homeowners down.
Yes, this is
first-time homeowners down
Exactly.
payment.
Yep, for first-time homeowners. That was we were able to do $1 million leveraging American Rescue Plan Act, and that was administered by Worcester Community Housing Resources. That allowed us to do more. It was up to $25,000 per household and per transaction, whereas the federal dollars that we can use on a regular basis is a much smaller dollar amount, capped at $5,000, which, as we know, doesn't go very far these days.
Peter, I want to acknowledge the fact that you actually aren't limited on time. Our second speaker didn't show.
Oh, okay.
So, there's, obviously I want to respect your time.
No, it's okay. It's okay.
But no need
Sure.
to think that we're rushing you. So
Okay, that's helpful. I thought there was somebody else after me.
there was, but
Okay.
So can I ask on that? That was really elucidative to learn that before the ARPA money came, it was a $5,000 maximum
Yeah.
that you could give to first-time homeowners that are that qualified, income qualified, and up to $25,000 that you could give with the ARPA money. That seems like a real game changer.
Yes.
Do you have any idea about numbers? Like, how many people were we able to help on an annual basis under the old program of 5,000, and how many people could we help with all the ARPA money that came in that one-time bonus for us? How many
Yeah.
people have been able to help in the city?
So let me just see if I have those numbers handy. I definitely have the ARPA numbers handy. Let me see if I have the regular numbers handy. And I think some of it has to do with, you know, there were certainly in the dollars that we receive on a regular basis, there are more regulations, more requirements. ARPA was a little bit more flexible, which was helpful in doing things that we thought would have a greater impact because the federal government, one of the regulations caps it at 5,000 for the dollars we use through Community Development Block Grant. And
You know, just for people listening, you know, not everybody understands that ARPA basically was COVID relief money.
Yes, yeah,
So just
yeah,
so everybody
yeah.
listening knows.
yes, American Rescue Plan Act dollars. And so I don't have that hand. It's not a significant number in terms of the amount of folks that we help with that 5,000. Again, I think some of it has to do with, you know, everything, all the hoops that you jump through for it, because it's also a reimbursement, right? So when you think of a down payment, it's like, wait, so I actually have to have the $5,000 to pay at closing to then get reimbursed the $5,000. It's just some of these federal regulations don't always work super successfully in practice, and that's why one of the reasons why this, I think the American Rescue Plan Act version was a lot more effective was having Worcester Community Housing Resources administer it versus having it administered in-house by the municipality. And so for the $1 million that we provided to Worcester Community Housing Resources, that was 38 residents. And that went fast. That was like within less than a year, which is at least tenfold what we do with the regular program. In terms of, you had asked about rental assistance as well. So this isn't something that we have dollars to do on a regular basis. One of the primary core programs in Massachusetts would be the Rental Assistance for Families in Transition, the RAFT program, which is a state program. And we provided 1.6 million in rental assistance through American Rescue Plan Act, which supported 365 households. And I will highlight that for a minute because I think it is important in terms of how we try to listen to our partners and listen to the community to fill gaps and address needs that are unmet in the city. Because one of the things about the RAFT program that is a bit of a challenge is that it requires that the landlord have started the eviction process by having already issued a notice to quit. And we know once that it gets to that level, evictions are costly. It influences landlords to choose tenants that don't have eviction histories. And so when you wait for that notice to quit to happen, it's just, I think, a little too far along versus when we want to catch it quickly when folks are starting to fall behind before it gets to the notice to quit level, which is what we did in partnership with primarily Central Mass Housing Alliance with the ARPA dollars. Is we did not have to have that requirement of the notice to quit in place, which helped a great deal because there were a lot of folks that were falling behind that we were able to keep, you know, safe and secure in their existing home and address that situation without having it get to that level. So we had 1.6 million that has been expended out of that program, helping 365 households. One of the things that I'll mention is that we do have this other opportunity, and I guess I'll speak to it now, which is called Home ARP. So it's under the Home program at the federal level. It was a one-time appropriation of American Rescue Plan. It was basically authorized on the American Rescue Plan Act dollars, but it was separate from like the direct allocation that you hear about. We got 146 million. You hear a lot about that and how we were using the $146 million. That was technically under state and local fiscal recovery funds, but there was a separate appropriation in the federal legislation that was called Home ARP, which enabled us to secure another $5.9 million through that program. And the purpose of it was specifically to address folks that are experiencing homelessness or at risk of homelessness. And so we're able to leverage some of those dollars to do additional tenant-based rental assistance.
Can I ask you on that?
Yeah.
When you always hear about the people that went into the emergency shelter system, some newcomers to the United States, others homegrown people with problems. That money that the state used to support people's rental assistance for a year or two, is that the same tranche of money or is that a completely different program?
I think you're referring to Home Base. There's a program that the state has called Home Base that provides, it's kind of part of their transition where they can help subsidize the rent requirements in the permanent housing, where they've been housed for up to 2 years. I'm not an expert in that program, but I think it's Home Base, not RAFT, is I think what you're describing, yeah. It's also administered locally by CMHA. So one of the things that we tried to do too when we were thinking about, how best to address this need for rental assistance in the community is that folks already know certain agencies about what is their core programming, what do they do, how can they help. And so we were intentional about partnering with CMHA on rental assistance because they are already administering RAFT, already administering home base, so they could best kind of do that case management of like, this is the need that this resident or this family is facing based on these programs. How do we kind of best apply the right resource to that situation? So it's helpful to have like kind of almost that one-stop shop kind of in terms of trying to keep folks stable into housing through that rental assistance mechanism. In addition, and this, I guess, on a similar theme, as everybody probably knows, Worcester Community Action Council does the fuel assistance, low-income housing, and energy assistance program. And so we were able to, because that always doesn't quite meet the needs that we're seeing in the community, we used American Rescue Plan Act dollars to provide utility assistance that was administered by Worcester Community Action Council over the last couple of years. And so the $1.54 million that we were able to do in utility assistance has helped over 1,000 households now in the city of Worcester. And again, I think there was some level of flexibility there. I don't know all the nuances. Like I am very familiar with the rental assistance nuances, but I think their current program works pretty well without having too many gaps. So a lot of it was kind of enabling them to do more of a good thing that they do on a regular basis with that program that they already administer. In terms of dollars that we get on a regular basis, aside from, again, that like kind of one-time opportunity with pandemic relief funding and the ongoing opportunity of this home ARP that I'll speak a little bit further about, is what we call entitlement grants. So our office, through a couple of divisions, but speaking on the housing issue tonight, we receive annual dollars that are called entitlement grants. So based on the population size of the city and our income demographics, we receive dollars through these programs on a formula basis. So we don't have to competitively apply for them in the way that we competitively apply for lead paint abatement. So they're known as, I have acronyms here, Community Development Block Grant, CDBG, HOPWA, which is Housing Opportunities for People with AIDS, and then ESG, which is Emergency Solutions Grants. So those come to us annually. They've been, I would say this year, the current fiscal year that we're in, are more or less level funded. Some programs went down, some went up by a few percentage points, but more or less level funded. And that was enabled through the continuing resolution that Congress passed in the spring. So we are paying close attention right now. As you know, there's conversations happening again in Washington about the next continuing resolution, but that is something that could affect the work that we do if any of these programs were cut. But for now, it's been level funded, which would get us through June of 2026 at a minimum. And I guess on these three, what I would highlight most is this CDBG helps us with the owner-occupied housing rehab program. So the last bullet point, one of the things that we do to help homeowners that might not be able to keep up with deferred maintenance and code violations, we want to keep them safe and housed in their home. And so we can use CDBG for eligible owners, as well as elder repair, so senior housing if they might need to do modifications, like again, trying to age in place and create accessibility improvements or other deferred maintenance. We use the CDBG Community Development Block Grant for that. That does come with a deed restriction for affordable housing. So and usually the things that we get involved with or the things that we touch allows us to get more deed restrictions out there in the community on our housing stock for affordability.
How do people know that that's available and that they can apply to that? Let an elderly person that has a boiler or something or whatever it is that breaks down, and most people would know that the government can help you in such and such a way. How does somebody learn what's available to them, Joe Q Public, who has that kind of problem?
Yeah, people consume information in a variety of different ways, right? So we try to do a variety of different channels to address that. We've certainly had a number of community presentations. We go to the Senior Center, the Elder Affairs Commission. Certainly our partners out there in the community know about them, as well as inspectional services. So some of these things come up as inspectional services is doing inspections and referring them. We're also going to be piloting very soon. We've kind of been doing this on a more informal basis, where we're going to try to package it up and do a better job of marketing it. Is almost like a one-stop kind of opportunity for housing assistance at Mead Street in inspectional services. So if they have questions about code, questions about programs that might be available to them, we would bring in some agency partners as well to try to do a good a better job and doing it in different formats, right? Because again, you can't just rely on social media, you can't just rely on referrals, you can't just rely on one communication channel. So you could always do more and do things differently. So if there are, other places that you think that we should be at, or other channels that we should be pushing dollars out or pushing messaging out through, certainly let us know. I will say that for both of those programs, we currently have a waiting list because unfortunately the need is always greater than the available resources. But yeah, always happy to hear different recommendations in that regard. And then the one that I also wanted to highlight is this Emergency Solutions Grant. So ESG, again, we get dollars every year. Some of the things that we are able to do with that through agency partners are programs around rapid rehousing, tenant-based rental assistance, supportive services and shelter operations, case management. Some of those dollars help fund the staffing that we have in Health and Human Services for outreach in the community. So that is something, all of these programs, we do an annual application, not the ones that we were just talking about with owner-occupied housing rehab, but for housing opportunities for people with AIDS, emergency solutions grants, and then how we use CDBG to support nonprofits as well with various services they do. We do an annual RFP process that folks are hopefully familiar with. And we have a committee, one of our boards and commissions as a city is the Community Development Advisory Committee that reviews those applications and then makes recommendations to the manager on. So these are critical resources that we get from the federal government that, again, they haven't been cut yet. We have level funding, at least for this fiscal year. They were slow in getting, we just got the contract on Friday of last week. The fiscal year started in July, so that was a little concerning. That it took, almost 3 months to get the contracts, but it has been level funded. So it's something that we keep a close eye on for sure. And it helps us do important work in the community.
When you say funding, if the federal government shuts down in 2 weeks, if there is no continuing resolution, what does that mean for the funds that you're getting from the federal government?
So for these particular ones that I'm referring to now, because we signed the contract on Friday and got it in by today, which was the deadline, we can still access the dollars that we've already been appropriated in the federal financial system, essentially. So if that were to happen, these programs would not be affected.
Yeah, the October stuff is for future.
Yeah. The other thing I mentioned again was this home ARP. So this was part of the ARPA legislation, but a kind of separate carve out we received $5.9 million specifically to address folks experiencing homelessness or at risk of homelessness. The good thing about this, we did one RFP so far and allocated 1.4 million. So we do have additional dollars that we're going to be doing a second RFP on this winter, hopefully late fall, but could be winter. The good thing about that is that we have until September of 2030 to spend it. So it also was different time frame than the state and local fiscal recovery funds that we received directly, which had a time frame of 2024 December to get it under contract, 2026 to spend it. We have until September of 2030 to spend these dollars. So obviously, strategically, we prioritized the other ARPA dollars that we had to meet that deadline. And then we did our first RFP on this last early 2025, I think it was January, allocated 1.4 million based on the proposals received there, and we'll have additional dollars to continue that work over the next couple of years.
Same program? I missed the beginning of what you said. Same programs or different programs?
It's different. It kind of has some overlap with ESG, Emergency Solutions Grant, because both of them, the theme or the commonality between the two is providing supports to folks that are experiencing homelessness or at risk of homelessness. The one thing that we can do with ESG that we can't do with this home ARP is congregate shelter operations. So for ESG, we can do help with the operating costs of congregate shelter. We cannot do that with home ARP, but we can do other things like supportive services, case management, things like that, tenant-based rental assistance out of the home ARP dollars. So those are the highlights of some of the other programs that we have that I thought you'd be interested in. And then I did want to do this quick project spotlight as well, because again, as we adapt the housing strategy, this is certainly aligned with one of those pillars, but this is also something that was specifically called out as an objective in the city's strategic plan, was to establish a day resource center in the city. So sort of that one-stop shop idea of having somewhere open during the day where folks experiencing homelessness could go and, charge their phones, get connected to services, whether that's healthcare or employment services, do laundry, take a shower, all those kinds of things. We're partnering with the Central Mass Housing Alliance. They just recently took ownership of this property. This is 134 Gold Street in Worcester. It's about 20,000 square feet in total, 10,000 square feet on each floor. Day Resource Center will be primarily on the first floor, 10,000 square feet, and then they have working through different ideas for what would be complementary and the highest and best use for the second floor. It is a very, like many of these projects, very complicated and a big effort. So we really appreciate CMHA for stepping up in this way to add this new resource for our community. And we did commit $4 million in support of this project. I think the total cost is in excess of $10 million. And it was, just to be, I guess, factually correct here, just as a point of I guess technicality, is that the $4 million that we dedicated was actually out of interest that was generated on the American Rescue Plan Act. So as you can imagine, when we got the $146 million from the federal government out of ARPA, it was in a bank account. There was an interest-bearing account, which had some good interest on it over the last 4 years or so, 3 or 4 years. So we were able to utilize dollars through that to contribute $4 million to the acquisition and renovation of this property for that use. So if all things go well, they're hoping, I think it's an aggressive timeline, but it's good to have good goals. They're hoping to be having this open before the end of 2026. That is, vacant building requires extensive upgrades to support, the new occupancy of it. But I think we're, rolling up the sleeves and optimistic that we can get that hopefully brought online before the end of 2026. And then just if there's any kind of other questions, but also just wanted to make sure that folks were aware of how to access some of these important planning documents that we have as a city, the city's strategic plan, the housing production plan that was recently finalized and adopted by the city council, as well as the Worcester Now Next plan that was adopted by council over a year ago that we've been, slowly but surely addressing the recommendations of that. And we will have, again, one of the things was the housing production plan, which we've achieved, accessory dwelling units, which we've achieved. One of it was about staffing capacity in our planning office. So in the FY26 budget, we proposed, and the city council supported a dedicated full-time long-range planner in the planning division, which is going to be huge for us. We're working on the job description now, and that person will also help us with one of the overarching recommendations out of Now Next was to embark on a 2 to 3 year process to completely rewrite our zoning ordinance as a city, which is a monumental task. We'll have some outside help from a consultant on that as well. But the other kind of short-term, almost stopgap measure out of Now Next, we're actually initiating this conversation hopefully next week with the council and the planning board, is really looking at our off-street parking ratios. So minimum requirement when you're creating housing in particular. Obviously, it relates to commercial uses as well, but particularly with housing, as you've seen, one of the key barriers to housing production has been how much land are we dedicating to the storage of personal vehicles versus land that we are dedicating towards shelter for people through housing production. And so we're going to be having analysis, if you will, or communication to the council, hopefully, like I said, next week, to move the needle on that recommendation of Now Next, to really think about what are our off-street parking ratios, do those make sense, should we reduce them to help facilitate new housing creation in the city.
So my global question is this. The government programs on the municipal, state, and national level seem very impressive, obviously, from what you prepared and presented and what you're doing. But we have an incredible housing problem in the United States, in our state, and in our city. If you had a magic wand, or whether it be zoning or whether it be something else, what would you suggest we do? What are we doing wrong? If we're doing all that we're doing, and it's still, and affordability is the major problem for housing nationwide as well as our city and state, what are we supposed to do? What do you think we're supposed to do instead of what we're doing?
That's a good question. I think if I had the answer to that, I should be president of the United States.
I'm not sure you're president.
I don't know.
Let's hope so.
It's not a bad thing.
No. In all seriousness, and there's a ways of looking at it through different lenses, right? So I think one of the things that we get caught up in, right, is that we see this kind of societal issue and we think about it in a lens that is a silo, right? So like if I were to answer that question on housing, it would be more dollars, right? Like if you look low-income housing tax credits, at the state, federal level, other programs that help with subsidizing the costs of bringing on projects. That is vital, and they're always oversubscribed. So I think one of those kind of low-hanging fruit, answers would be put more dollars into low-income housing tax credits and other programs, and some of it was authorized, right? When you think of the Affordable Homes Act at the state level, $5 billion, but not all of that has been authorized. Like, it's been authorized, but it hasn't been in the budget yet. So I think being able to address the backlog of people would like to build more housing and build more affordable housing, but you can't get around the reality that subsidy is needed to make it happen, right? Because when you look at the construction costs, when you look at how much debt a project can support, so how much equity needs to go in, and some of that equity has return requirements, right? The investment, that is a return requirement, just like banks have their debt service coverage ratio requirements. There's a gap there. You need to fill it with the public source, and there's just not enough of that public source to address all of the opportunity, really, for folks to create the housing. So that's kind of like the easiest answer. But when you really look at it, and this is beyond my pay grade, but when you look at things like universal basic income, or it's not just about the building stock and that, it's also about how do we come up with other ways of helping folks just meet their basic needs, and things like, universal basic income, things like that. So there's a variety of ways that you can tackle it, but I think the easy answer on the housing side is we just need to have more subsidy available. Otherwise, these projects, they're upside down, quite frankly.
And zoning laws, even though we love our zoning laws, we all want an ideal way to live, and zoning laws help us get that. Are they a hindrance in some cases to more housing being built, and should we be looking at that?
I would say on a more macro level, across the Commonwealth and certainly beyond, yes. I would say that there are some opportunities that we've identified for our zoning ordinance, right? Whether it be the accessory dwelling units or looking at off-street parking. I don't think that our zoning framework today has been fundamentally, a barrier where it's oh my gosh, all of this, we could have seen so much more housing produced over the last, 10 or 20 years, but for the zoning ordinance. I don't think that's the case here. I think Worcester's challenge has been a little bit more making the economic fundamentals work, right? And now we obviously know that folks are already experiencing those pressures around utility costs and food costs, and rent costs are part of that. But we don't have the rents of Boston. I'm not saying that we should or would want to aspire to that, but you see more happening or projects able to pencil out in Boston because, again, when those rents are at a different level, the construction costs are almost the same right here in Boston, maybe marginally cheaper here. But when you just put it into the math equation of can I get a deal finance or a project finance in Worcester, the answer is going to be no here far more often than the answer in Boston. Partially because, again, you just run the pro forma. What is the revenue going to be created from this? What do I have to pay back the bank on the debt service in terms of the loan that I get and the interest rate? What is the return requirement of investors? And I know that some folks, in some cases it's warranted, but when we think about I think there's been some vilification of the development community, and I don't know that that's totally warranted. At the end of the day, when folks are making investments, putting the equity into projects, it's because they're looking to generate a return on that investment. And if we say that that's, they're making too much money and they can handle all these additional requirements, or they should just charge less, the reality is that that capital will just flow to other forms of investments. They don't have to put those dollars into real estate. They could put it into a variety of different instruments to generate a return on that investment. And so we should want real estate to be a good investment. That is a good thing. So that's something to, I guess, keep in mind as well.
Yeah, specifically to that issue, I remember in the Mike O'Brien days, we talked about the cost of construction being similar to Boston, and without some sort of subsidy or government involvement, nothing's ever going to get built here. And then all of a sudden, a lot of stuff started to get built here. What happened? How did that happen after all those years? I was saying, it's not going to happen without government help. And then all of a sudden, people are building all sorts of apartment buildings that we said don't make sense financially.
It's pretty easy because it's an easy answer because from the time that was stated to now, look at what the rents were then and the rents now, right? Rents have grown significantly in Worcester. And in some cases, again, that has put a lot of pressure on residents, but it has started to make those numbers work a little bit better. And I'd say that there's still a challenge. I would say that in 2019, there was this kind of we were almost at sort of like a little bit of a precipice where it was like some of these projects are actually penciling out without subsidy. You look at 145 Front Street or the Cove, next to the ballpark, and then interest rates went from 3% to 7%, and all of a sudden we had the need for subsidy again because now the projects don't pencil out anymore. And construction costs, as we've seen, are at all-time highs. So it was starting to get, organically at that level where it just didn't have as much of a need for subsidy. In a certain case, right? Not all projects are the same, right? Some of these, costly adaptive reuse of a historic property is harder to accomplish than having a virgin piece of land that's zoning by right and easy to build on, so for sure. So it's not like every project is the same in terms of its economic fundamentals, but we were seeing more and more projects start to pencil out on its own with just private financing before the pandemic, and then again, interest rates, construction costs, everything else, where the need is perking up again, which I would just say is one of the reasons why it is necessary to consistently evaluate regulations like inclusionary zoning, because we actually proposed the framework that we have for inclusionary zoning in 2022 when interest rates were 3%. If I were to look at inclusionary zoning today, would it be the same? I'm not sure, but I think we at least need to give it its chance, get some more data to inform if we were to suggest, any modifications, or just be able to evaluate, is it working, or is it having other unintended consequences? I think we need to give it more time. But, the framework for that was put forward in 2022 when interest rates were 3% and construction costs were 30% lower.
And the high-end ones that are being built with all the amenities, have they flatlined as far as occupancy? Is there any occupancy issues that they're not full anymore, or are they just full as soon as they build them?
Well, I think my answer to that is largely anecdotal, because I don't have that data in front of me. But based on what I know, I would say that the absorption has been successful. Usually, a group that's building an affordable or any housing development, multifamily housing development, is going to look at like a 12-month period to get stabilized. In some cases, and in all cases, they hope that they'll be stabilized sooner than that. And I think that we've seen, when you look at, I'm trying to think of like when the courthouse was brought online, the courthouse lofts, they were leased up less than 6 months. I think we're seeing it now in that 6 to 12 months. So we're seeing a little bit more of a lag, I guess, on the time frame for stabilization and absorption. But it's not something that's super concerning right now. I mean, again, our vacancy rates have been persistently low. They're still lower than 3% right now, probably lower than 2% right now. So we need to build more. The case is there to continue to see more units created. And I think that the absorption on effectively all of the projects so far has been successful. We have some, when you look at, in particular, right, on the market rate, to your point, 3 large properties brought online around the same time: the Revington, the Alta on the Row, and the Cove. And I think that considering that's a lot of units to bring to market around the same time, I think that that's been successful in terms of how quickly it's been absorbed. But, they maybe were a little, I think all of them have been less than 12 months. And the Cove is still in that 12 months. So we'll kind of see. The Cove was brought online in January. So they have, 4 months left. I don't think they're at quite stabilization just yet, but they're getting there.
Can I ask, I want to bring it back a little bit to what you had briefly mentioned, and I want to pick your brain a little bit on that. You touched on universal basic income. Is that something that your office has been requested to look into? Is this something that you have just heard from other cities? Curious where that's at.
So one of the things that we did, and this wasn't like a brainchild or anything of ours, is through our community projects and programs under American Rescue Plan Act, one of the awards was to the Worcester Community Action Council to pilot a universal basic income program. And they were designing it as a pilot to try to then evaluate the successes of that, to then maybe have broader conversations with other funding sources and whatnot. So I think they would be more of a subject matter expert to speak to how did that go? Is it what we expected to see, and all of that.
So the city itself has not actually done a report on this?
No.
And where did the money come from to go to WCAC?
It was one of their proposals under the American Rescue Plan Act RFP that we had for community projects and programs. I think it was around 250,000. Actually, I might have it. Oh no, I don't have it in front of me. I think it was around 250,000 or so. Again, it was a pilot level, right? Because when you talk about doing that on a population scale, it's going to require significant dollars.
Okay, so with that, I'm gonna do something dramatic. I'm sorry, Pat. So the Human Rights Commission recognizes that economic stability is directly tied to housing security and the prevention of homelessness. In order to explore innovative approaches that may reduce housing insecurity and strengthen affordability, the Commission should respectfully request that the City Manager research and report back on the feasibility of implementing a universal basic income or direct cash assistance pilot program in Worcester. So that is my formal motion. Can I get a second for that motion?
Second.
Pat, roll call, please. And I'll send you the language, Pat.
So we have a motion made by the chair, seconded by member Jacqueline Yang. Have a roll call, please. Excuse me. Chair Guillermo Creamer Jr.
Aye.
Vice Chair Randy Feldman.
Nay.
Clerk Carrie Witherell.
Aye.
Member Bernard Reese.
Aye.
Member Anahit Marudian.
Aye.
Member Drew Schneblin.
Aye.
Member Jonathan Slavinskis.
Nay.
Member Jacqueline Yang.
Aye.
The motion carries.
Thank you. And then I also want to put forward something else. So in lieu of tonight's presentation, I'd like to put forward a motion for the Commission to affirm our support for inclusionary zoning and CPA funding and encourages the City Manager to continue this work in collaboration with the proper bodies. The goal of expanding affordable housing in Worcester.
Absolutely, it sounds like a
Second.
productive.
Wait, someone said something. Who was that?
Oh, that was me. I was seconding it, but looks like everybody else did it.
There's a second. She's second.
Oh, Commissioner Yang, second to that.
Thank you. So we have a motion for roll call voting, please, regarding inclusionary zoning, and you'll get me that language, Guillermo?
Yep.
Thank you.
I will.
Chairperson Guillermo Creamer Jr.
Aye.
Vice Chair Randy Feldman.
Aye.
Clerk Carrie Witherell.
Aye.
Member Bernard Reese.
Aye.
Member Anahit Marudian.
Aye.
Member Drew Schneblin.
Aye.
Member Jonathan Slavinskis.
Aye.
Member Jacqueline Yang.
Aye.
The motion carries.
Great, thank you. Peter, is there anything else you wanted to talk
Sorry,
about?
Guillermo.
Uh,
Guillermo.
Yes.
Sorry, I've been waiting. Sorry, you probably just didn't see the
I
hand
can't see it. I'm sorry, Drew.
That's okay. A couple of just very quick things. One, anecdotally, first of all, thank you, Peter. A lot of this has been very helpful. I think that it's obviously very important that the city continues to focus on affordable housing. Anything we can do to start to, help the residents of the city. I will forever be the person who sort of is that person villainizing the industry a little bit, only because I moved here a couple of years ago from Brooklyn, and I looked at both the Cove and the Revington, who are charging over $5,000 for a 2-bedroom. And that place still has a healthy amount of space, both of those places, because I've been in them both recently, and it's just, I genuinely feel like not the things we kind of need. I do think that we do need affordable housing units. Do you have demand numbers compared to the amount of units that we're building, like demand from the city, from the actual residents? Do we have like a comparison here?
So I think the best resource for that is, and the reason why we did it, is the housing production plan. So again, the purpose of that was to dive deep on the demographics of the city, both the recent trends as well as the projections, to then inform, around our housing production strategy. What is the number of units needed, different levels of area median income in terms of affordability, rent levels, all of that. So it gets pretty granular and pretty complex. I can tell you just by comparison, right, when I mentioned some of the market rate projects, and when they look at like a 12-month kind of time frame to get stabilized and whatnot, as a recent example, right in that general neighborhood as well, District 120 is a affordable housing project that we partnered with to get done, and that was 83 units of all affordable housing, all at 60% area median income or below. And for the 83 units, they had over 700 applications. So
And those filled up immediately, right?
Correct.
Because I lived next door to those. I lived at the above the food hall there.
Yeah, that's correct.
For the first year that I lived here. So those filled up quickly, but the ones around me in those other luxury apartments did not. And as far as I'm understand, even including the Revington, they had to make a deal with some of the Woo Sox players so they could fill some of those. Do you know if that's correct or not? Because I know that they're still trying to fill those places. And, I'm a little just concerned. The city has, like you said, less than 2% of a vacancy rate. I think it's like 1.7 is the last thing we saw. Third highest rent increase. Moving here from a large city, I was kind of shocked at the market rate. So seeing the market rate being this high versus what we're doing with affordable housing, I think both of those things are concerning to me. So what are the biggest barriers you think you're running into then?
Through the chair, biggest barriers in terms of accomplishing what?
Getting affordable housing off the ground, fulfilling demand. I mean, like you said, 120 filled immediately. You had over 700 people for 83 units. So that's a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, get myself in trouble here. I think if we need to rethink the way that public subsidy is basically provided to affordable housing projects, right? Because the irony of affordable housing is that it's the greatest need, much greater obviously the market rate, but it takes years longer and it's more expensive to build than market rate. The financing to accomplish getting an affordable housing project under construction. And there needs to be some rethinking about how we can do that faster. Some of it has to do with available resources, but some of it has to do with the process. And there's a reason why some of the process exists, right? Because any kind of public subsidy, taxpayer dollars at the end of the day requires a high level of scrutiny and oversight. So there's like a reason why processes get created and the cycles that they have and all of that. But at the end of the day, it just seems like the outcome is unfortunate and just ironic that it takes longer and it's more expensive to build affordable housing than it is to do market rate housing. So that's kind of, I think, the biggest issue, because I guess on the example of like District 120, right, the 83 units that were built near Polar Park, we would never be able to provide enough subsidy as a municipality to that project to get it done without help from state and local sources. The dollar value of low income housing tax credits in a project like that is literally tens of millions of dollars versus like maybe they can get 500,000 from the trust fund or $1 million from the trust fund. It's just not, we would never be able to address the level of subsidy needed to build the volume of units needed at a local level. It inherently relies on state and federal dollars as well. So the more that we can, do what's working well, get more dollars into what's working well, but also just kind of think a little differently, think creatively about how do we do this more efficiently. I mean, that was kind of like I mentioned earlier, and the chair commented on like universal basic income. It's kind of like there's all these different programs. It becomes so complex for folks, right? If they have a need for different, public benefits or public programs, we've made it so complex and hard to figure out that like maybe it actually is a better taxpayer investment to just like make it a lot easier and streamline it instead of having like all these hundreds of different programs depending on, your nuanced situation and then jumping through all the various hoops and trying to just figure out where do I go for help. So it's kind of, I guess, maybe a little long-winded answer, but at the end of the day, these projects rely on heavy amount of public subsidy because they just can't support like the level of debt, the debt service to overcome the construction costs, the interest rates, all those kinds of things. It just requires massive amounts of public subsidy to make it work.
Perfect. Thank you. I hope you don't get in trouble for saying that it should be easier to get affordable housing and cheaper, and that the loopholes are a problem. I think that's the thing that we need to say out loud, right? So thank you.
I have a question in regards to affordable housing. Again, it seems like it takes an incredible amount of effort and time to get these units built. And one of the problems that comes up with affordable units often is that the amount of time a developer needs to keep those units affordable for is often time limited. So in Worcester, is there a time limit on how long those units need to stay affordable for before going up to market rate? And if so, how is that worked out and determined?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's largely driven by funding sources, right? So depending on the various affordable housing subsidy, you could see it from being 30, 40, 50 years. So the way that we wanted to not have inclusionary zoning, for example, be inconsistent with what might be required through some funding source is that inclusionary zoning says that it can not less than 30 years. So it could be 40, it could be 50. And usually what we see, and actually, well, let me comment on something else first. If we do something like I had mentioned the community development block grant for like owner occupied housing rehab, the dollars are very small there. So the deed restriction is shorter, like 10, 15 years. So sometimes it's like kind of being commensurate with like what's the public resource being provided. But what we often see too for affordable housing developers, particularly like mission-driven affordable housing developers, some of them are nonprofits, you know, our local CDCs or local community development corporations, other sometimes larger nonprofits like the Community Builders is pretty active in Worcester. They're doing the Merrick on the Square project right now on Seaver Street. What we often see with those affordable developments is that, again, unfortunately, the dollars that are generated through rents over the course of, you know, those 20, 30 years doesn't provide a significant reserve to the project to then deal with deferred maintenance or just obsolescence and the investment that you need to make when those properties come up on like 30 years. And so what you often see is that those developers do a recapitalization with additional public resources to address those improvements that are needed at the end of a 30-year terms. And then it comes with yet another 30-year kind of extension. A good example, just recently, Worcester Common Ground has successfully refinanced, I think almost all of, if not all of their portfolio of units in the Piedmont neighborhood. And that has extended, you know, the life of those affordability restrictions as well. So we tend to see it like almost a revolving type of restriction. Not in all cases though, because your point is well taken that sometimes they do expire and then no longer have that restriction. But in many cases, we do see that kind of refinancing and revolving nature associated with the restrictions.
And the Section 8 voucher program, is that purely state? Is it purely federal? Is it a combo? How's that working out? Is that a good program? What could be different to make it more effective if it's not?
Through the chair, I'm not actually an expert on a Section 8. So it's certainly the rental side of things, right? It's a voucher to support the rental payment versus a lot of what we've been talking about has been the subsidy needed on the front end to subsidize the development costs of bringing housing production online. But certainly the Section 8 program is on the other side of the equation, which is more on the operating side, right? The subsidy for the rental payment itself. And I believe, don't quote me on this, most of those, if not all of those, are administered by the Worcester Housing Authority. So they would be the best organization to kind of comment on that and how it's working. And there's certainly not enough of them, right? I know there's a wait list for them. And I know that the state vouchers, the ones that the state have are more project-based vouchers. So when we were talking about like permanent supportive housing, the state had some vouchers. Again, I don't think they have any available now, but that are tied to the property, not tied to the household, right? So a lot of the Section 8 ones are mobile vouchers where it goes with the family to the apartment that they end up living in, not tied to a property. But that's why sometimes with the permanent supportive housing, those project-based vouchers are so critical because those projects at those deep levels of affordability need that rental subsidy in order for them to just have enough dollars flowing into the project to keep the lights on and cover the insurance on the property and that kind of stuff, property maintenance. And so they really need those project-based vouchers that are tied to the property, because if they had tenants with mobile vouchers that then leave and then the next tenant come in doesn't have a mobile voucher, now they have a gap where they could be in a real squeeze. So there's different kinds of vouchers out there. And Section 8, my understanding is that almost all of them are mobile and administered by the Housing Authority, but they would be the best group to kind of chat about that. I'm not a subject matter expert on that.
Okay.
through the chair, I just have a question.
Yes.
Anyone tracking the executed evictions that are happening in the city?
Through the chair, we work with the Central West Justice Center on that. Some of the dollars that we actually had, as I've mentioned, through the American Rescue Plan Act were provided for some of the legal assistance that they provide. I know one of the things that happened, I think it was during the pandemic, was we were getting lists, like the basically tracking, if you will, of eviction data. And I don't know what statute or regulation it was, temporary, during the state of emergency perhaps, that expired. I think it was probably tied to the state of emergency at the Commonwealth level. We're no longer getting that level of data that we were getting for some time, which was pretty helpful. I do think that there are maybe other agencies that are getting that more frequently, or certainly more kind of up to speed on the day-to-day eviction volume. I know that we do get aggregate reports on just how eviction levels are, where they're at and going up. So it's something that we work to try to more on the preventative side of things, right? So the municipality or our office doesn't step into those situations. A lot of what we try to do is support those partner agencies like the Central West Justice Center that provide that level of assistance. But what we try to do, like with the programs described, like rental assistance, is try to do the prevention side of things. So how do we keep folks, stable in their housing and address some of those situations, especially for evictions of non-payment of rent as they're getting behind versus once they get to that eviction level. So again, I think there might be some other community partners that might be better folks to kind of speak on the status of kind of the state of evictions in the city and the Commonwealth.
Right, I would think that would show like the need or the demand for affordable housing.
Through the chair, I think a lot of what the housing production plan talks about is looking at income levels and then rent levels in the city and showing the discrepancy between the two. Certainly there's a variety of reasons. I mean, you even have no fault evictions, right? So like even if somebody was in an apartment that was affordable, they were keeping up with rent, there are a lot of situations that could be in that eviction data set, like no fault evictions, that I don't think would be correlated to affordable housing need per se, because they could be for a variety of reasons.
Great. Any more questions?
Like on that data set, one of the reasons might be, at least comes to my mind, I don't know how widespread this is if someone doesn't have, like in Worcester, a lot of people have a lease for 1 year and then they go month to month and become tenants at will. So then you have an eviction at that point because the landlord just says, I want that space back. And why does the landlord say, I just want that space back if you're a good payer? The only reason I can think of that's likely to happen would be, I just want to improve my building and get higher rents. So I want to clean it out and I want to get higher rents from those people. That's just one isolated thing that came to my mind over how and why that could happen if it's not about an issue of affordability. Is that correct? And are there a million other things you're thinking of that aren't that we have to consider?
I think that's definitely one reason that occurs. One that also occurs is, and this is probably more rare than the example you just gave, is sometimes a landlord actually wants to move back into their apartment, or they might have a family member or something like that needs to move into the unit that they have available. I think there was something at the state level, maybe a pending bill, that was talking about no fault evictions, and it carved out some exceptions for like the example I just gave, where it's just like, in that case, rather trying to protect against the no fault eviction so that you can kind of do some cosmetic improvements and then charge more. I think the bill that was proposed to try to put a little bit of a limit or even prevent those no fault evictions carved out some exceptions, like if the landlord needed to move back in because they needed the unit for themselves to live in. There could be other, aside from just like seeing the opportunistic side of it, there could be like real issues that maybe deferred maintenance wise, renovation wise, how old is the unit, when's the last time it's had the investment that maybe is challenging to do without the vacancy, There could be a variety of reasons for that. I mean, even in the case, it's usually temporary, but I was describing our lead paint abatement program. When that unit is undergoing that improvement and renovation to get the lead out, the folks are temporarily relocated. they do come back in that example. So it's not exactly apples to that question, but.
And I was thinking that I heard a statistic about triple deckers where some of the floors are vacant is a surprisingly high number or something like that. Is that so?
Yes, yeah. There are a number, it's hard to pinpoint it. I think the rental registry is going to give us a better insight into trying to really get a handle on what that number is. I know there's been estimates in the past of, could it be 1,000 or 2,000 units that are vacant that are maybe somewhat habitable. Maybe they do need some upgrades to make them habitable, but that's definitely lost potential. And we could go down a long list as to why that might be on some of those units.
And that long list, is there anything that you can think of that, we can be doing to abrogate the difficulties of getting those up to snuff and rented?
Through the chair, there's a wide range of that. That's hard to, answer with one solution. But so we have some of the programs that we have, again, like if it's deferred maintenance, like maybe it's not habitable and it's overwhelming, for a landlord to try to, some cases, you hear stories about the 3-deckers that has been owned by that individual for 30 plus years, right? And they might not have the wherewithal to take on, the project to address those deferred maintenance issues and make it habitable again. We have some programs that can assist with that, right? And in fact, usually our housing development staff, knowing that some of these, in the case of like that owner-occupied housing rehab example, that they don't do this regularly, so they don't know how to put together specifications for the contractor, put it out to bid, get quotes and all of that. Our staff actually walks them through that and helps them put together those specifications and get quotes and all of that, because that alone can be really overwhelming for folks.
I see Father Slavinskis has his hand up.
Yeah, first, just wanted to commend you on all the knowledge that you've given and shared with us, and the knowledge that you have in that brain. I would have given up about 2 hours ago. You did a great job. And to the fellow commissioners there, I think it speaks volumes, the care that we have for the residents, in regards to this. And we have to understand and, come to understand and know. And we know the reality, people are just struggling to put a dollar somewhere, and if it's the rental situation, then it's the utility situation. And we see how the electric prices are going up, the gas and all of this. And people are just trying to figure out, okay, who do we pay? Where do we pay? And we see how that becomes a great barrier for them to then even get housing. They have to pay off these electric bills before they could pay off, a month's rent, something like that there. So I think it's just good that we start to acknowledge this more and more and talk about it. And maybe in future conversations start to look at, okay, how do we look at those utility issues that are affecting the residents of Worcester that have a great effect on them, and preventing them from getting to that next level as well.
Awesome. All right. Thank you so much, Peter, for taking the time and for giving us a lot. I hope that, you appreciate doing that, but also like the stuff that was put forward by the commission was to help your work. Obviously it's not to hinder, but to assist and make it as important as we know it is. So really appreciate you taking the time and sharing this. I know that Peter would welcome, obviously, things in the future and hope to have you back, obviously, in the future again. And I think that we'll probably meet separately as well with Kevin and Pat independently. And so looking forward to those conversations. But again, thank you, commissioners, for your questions and your comments. All these things are really important because they help shape the decisions that kind of are created out of all of this. So thank you. Thanks again, Peter.
And that's not even about economic development. That's just about housing. And we were so impressed with how much you know. So
this
thank you
is
for
just a
sharing that
portion
with
of
us.
Peter's work. Let's be very clear about that. Okay, great. So commissioners, just a reminder again that the next commission meeting will be Monday, October 27th. It will be headed by the vice chair, as I will be out of country. Please do your best to be in attendance. Remember, 5 is quorum, so definitely want to make sure that Randy has at least that, so that we can make sure that we're moving along, because we have a November agenda and a December agenda, so we don't want to keep pushing things off. As I said before, happy Hispanic Heritage Month. Celebrate accordingly. Go try some Latino food, go to Main South, go to different parts of the city and check something out that you might not have in the past. Thank you all again for your continued commitment and your participation. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
I'll make the motion.
Second.
Second. Well,
Let's give that to Father Slavinskas. There's a little bit of lag online.
So we have a motion to adjourn at 8:11 PM. A roll call vote, please. Chair Guillermo Creamer Jr.,
Aye.
Vice Chair Randy Feldman,
He said aye, but he walked away.
Clerk Carrie Witherell,
Aye.
Member Bernard Reese,
Aye.
Member Anahit Merudian,
Aye.
Member Drew Schneblin,
Aye.
Member Jonathan Slavinskis,
aye.
Member Jacqueline Yang.
Aye.
The motion carries. We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.